Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. This photo here is concept art made by Aaron McBride for Rogue One. It's supposed to be a picture of Saw Gerrera, and it's a pretty extreme depiction of the character we would see in that film, who thank God was portrayed by Forrest Whitaker and not Fat Vin Diesel. Now, Saw Gerrera was not a new character by any means. He had already been around for quite some time in both the Clone Wars and Rebels series. And I think it's always been really underplayed just how important of a character he is to the Star Wars universe. His longevity and presence extending from the Clone Wars to the Galactic Civil War alone should make us pay more attention to him. Now, I know a lot of guys hate it when I talk politics and, the dangers of aquatic marine animals, but Star Wars has always been intertwined with these type of political motifs. As awesome as lightsaber duels and watching Vader murk his way through a bunch of Padawans and then Rebels, George Lucas always intended these moments to be just one layer of the story. These are the personal layers of the story that showcase the consequences that the larger galactic organization and politics have on the individual. We're supposed to empathize with characters like Anakin and see how individuals like him are swept up in the machinations of those who truly control the galaxy, and how indiscriminate tragedy can be when chaos and deceit reign supreme. George Lucas's criticism against authoritarianism with fascist qualities has always been on clear display in the Star Wars franchise. From Palpatine's gradual dismantling of the democratic institutions that guarded the galaxy, to his dedication to militarism, to the crisp Hugo Boss-inspired uniforms worn by his officers. But his criticism for the other end of the spectrum, the other extreme that might look aesthetically different but oftentimes use the same tactics and created the same results, has always been a lot more muted. But Lucas was always wise enough to see that the rebellion he was building up against the Empire also needed an honest critique. And so, many years ago, George Lucas created the character known as Saw Gerrera today. He was supposed to be part of this live-action Star Wars show that Lucas had planned but never got off the ground. If you couldn't tell by Saw Gerrera's metal legs and his dependence on supplementary oxygen, he in many ways is the Darth Vader of the rebellion. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com. It's because of sponsors like this we're able to do the videos we want instead of the videos that the algorithm wants us to do. Today, we have the First On. This is the replica of Obi-Wan Kenobi's first and second lightsaber. It's a really solid hilt, really good for Form 3 defensive techniques. So guys, this is one of Obi-Wan Kenobi's favorite Form 3 techniques. Let's say you're going home one night, it's late, you just had a really long day at the Jedi Temple and some crazy dude comes out of the shadows and he's all like, "Give me all your credits!" So you're gonna unseat your blade and you're gonna block. And now you're gonna move the assailant around. You got control right there. And once you get control, you're gonna pull out your blaster. The First On lightsaber is a premium elite hilt, and you can pair this with a Xenopixel blade, which has an LED running alongside the entire length of the tube, which gives you all sorts of cool different modes and ignitions. There's also the RGB soundboard, which is more suited for sparring and dueling. Check out the description below if you want to take a look at one of these lightsabers, and also don't forget to use the promo code PORG, that's all caps, for 20% off of your entire purchase. As usual, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. As Star Wars entered the 21st century, it began to shift away from its more black and white version of the world. Simplistic views of the galaxy can only help drive more extreme narratives from the radical fringes of society. For Star Wars to be more truthful and, more importantly, bring benefit to society and to the people who watch it, we have to come to the terms with the fact that there were good Imperials who could and did help undermine and destroy the Empire, sometimes even from within its ranks. We also have to realize that there were plenty of bad rebels that were willing to undermine the Alliance to restore the Republic's ultimate mission, which was restoring peace and stability to the galaxy. One of Mon Mothma's greatest fears was that after the victory was won, a new authoritarian regime from within her own ranks would take over. And this would also result in one of her most courageous and criticized policies, the New Republic's military disarmament. Some might say that she ended the war too soon. Some might say that she was naive to believe that the Empire would just willingly go away. I would argue that Mon Mothma was always focused more internally. She was afraid of individuals like Saw Gerrera. When Saw Gerrera was still in development as a character, his codename was Castro, and obviously his name sounds a lot like Che Guevara. These are two extremely violent individuals whose brand of socialism had left Cuba in a state of disrepair that it still lies in today. But socialism is not what's being put on trial today. Saw Gerrera didn't really have much of an economic ideology at all. Instead, the battle in Star Wars lies on another political spectrum scale. It was a battle between authoritarianism and anarchy. Luthen Rael, who is a very pragmatic individual, clearly saw who Saw Gerrera was.
I am the only one with clarity of purpose.
Well, anarchy is a seductive concept.
I could honestly watch an entire episode of Luthen Rael and Saw Gerrera talking to each other and trying to convince each other who was right. The sheer amount of neurologically atypical energy here is fantastic. Saw Gerrera was never supposed to be a leader for a movement. He's not a deep thinker, or at least he never really had the time or opportunity to think. He's a soldier, a great warrior, one constantly on the run from one occupier or another. By the time we see him in Rogue One, he had become a shell of his former self, a machine designed only for fighting. Saw Gerrera fought his first battles on his homeworld of Onderon. He would join a resistance campaign against the puppet monarch installed on the planet by the Separatists during the Clone Wars. It was during this time that Saw Gerrera would fight alongside one of the most important figures in his entire life, the only person he ever really trusted or listened to, and that was his sister, Stila Gerrera. She's a very cool-headed individual who's also very charismatic. She was a natural leader.
We need to do more damage. A few dozen broken down droids will do little to free Onderon.
The people need to believe we can succeed. Without their support, our efforts are meaningless.
So if you take a look at it, Stila and Saw Gerrera are focused on two very different things here. Saw Gerrera, as usual, is trying to blow things up. But Stila understood that revolutions, like the one they were trying to start, depended on popular support. Mon Mothma would actually have very similar arguments constantly with Saw Gerrera on this same matter many years later. But what made Stila so special was how she interacted with her brother. Even though they were talking about completely different things, she could make it seem like they were talking about the same things. She just had a way with them. If you take a look at this scene right here where Lux Bentori attempts to explain to Saw why they can't just blow everyone up. Lux Bentori is the son of a former Republic senator turned separatist. He comes from a very different world of politics and public opinion than Saw.
If they're afraid, they won't support us. We need to assure them of our intentions.
I don't understand. Why are they afraid?
Saw Gerrera had low emotional intelligence, and this would be a huge factor in almost everything he did in the future. He didn't understand that indiscriminate raids against separatist droids in a city full of civilians were going to scare the civilians even though he was trying to help them. Just like how targeting Imperial patrols in Jedha's crowded cities might lead to the same result. These civilians don't know what Saw Gerrera's intentions are. They might think he's a terrorist, and I think if Lux Bentori was given a chance to explain that to Saw, it would have gone very poorly. Luckily, Stila steps in.
Why are they afraid?
They're afraid we're not strong enough to win. We need to earn their trust.
Saw Gerrera was a weapon, a terrific weapon. He was extremely brave, strong, and he was very sharp in a tactical sense. He knew how to defeat his enemies. But weapons need guidance, and that role was always filled by Stila, until she tragically died from moving too quickly towards the ground while the ground was not moving at all. Well, slowly but surely, Saw Gerrera would begin to wander around, almost like one of those so-called smart weapons that begins to fly around in circles in loitering mode. These type of weapons are devoid of enough deep understanding of its actions aside from some basic parameters inputted into it by a commander that no longer could be reached anymore. And when these type of weapons are cut off from their commanders, they can become ineffective or even very dangerous. Now, there are plenty of reckless and bold individuals in Star Wars, but many of them, especially the heroes, end up learning from their mistakes. Han Solo is a great example of this. He got burned by Beckett once, and he never got burned by Beckett the second time around. But Saw Gerrera wasn't one of those individuals. He would continue fighting the Empire, would continue bashing his wall into an unmovable force until there was very little left of him. And that's because Saw was not much of a thinker. I mean, during the Clone Wars, Saw actually had this encounter with Ramses Dennup, the former monarch that he and Stila were trying to reinstate.
I was faced with a difficult choice. To join the Republic or the Confederacy. I had to pick a side before one was chosen for me. Except I chose neither.
This is a message about compromise, about pushing towards action, about choosing the lesser of evils and not waiting too long so that you have no choice at all.
King Denda chose his people instead of taking a side in the intergalactic war.
But of course, Saw Gerrera interpreted this message in a very different manner. Saw Gerrera sees a hero, but the monarch has already explained to him that he is no hero and that this entire civil war on their planet was his fault because he did not choose the side with the Republic, and now so many people are suffering. Saw Gerrera, until his dying day, would not heed this lesson. He only joined forces with rebel groups that aligned exactly to his own beliefs and needs, which honestly rarely happened. Saw Gerrera always found excuses and reasons not to work with other people.
Krieger's a separatist. Maipei's a neo-republican. The Partisan Alliance, sectorist, human cultist, galaxy partitionist. They're lost. All of them lost. Lost.
This is such a well-delivered line by Forrest Whitaker. We see the fire and passion of Saw Gerrera here, and it's almost like we shouldn't be paying attention to what he's saying, but how he's saying it. These are not the words of a man rashly arguing with Rael. He is bitter in his solitude and his inability to trust and understand any other person aside from the people in his group. In his madness, Saw Gerrera is basically alone, and this madness was the result of what happens after the Clone Wars. Shortly after the Republic transformed into the Empire, Saw Gerrera's militia on Onderon was asked to join the Empire and support it, which of course Gerrera had no intention of doing. Say what you want about Saw, but he would never hire himself out as a mercenary. He only took on causes and fights that he himself wanted to get into.
I'm not going to put my people at risk for someone else.
But the battles that Saw Gerrera fought, especially the one against the Empire, was far too big for him to fight alone.
Whatever our final version of success looks like, there's no chance any of us can make it real on our own.
But Saw Gerrera, stubborn as always, would try anyway. He would lose many friends, body parts, and pieces of his humanity along the way. The constant fighting without sight of a more precise goal scarred Saw in many ways not visible to the naked eye. He lost the ability to trust other people. He became angry, frightened, afraid of everything, and soon his organization started mirroring the transformation that was happening to him, and soon it was just full of a bunch of criminals and terrorists. Before long, he had the most extreme members of other rebel groups, like Benthic, who used to roll with Enfys Nest, joining Saw's movement. Saw's partisans weren't dangerous because they were an elite fighting force or well-disciplined. It was dangerous because it was full of a bunch of desperados, lost, angry, chaotic people not afraid of death if it means ending their own tortured existence. Emotions can only get you so far in life. It's something that can fuel us to do amazing things, and, a very disciplined Sith or someone like Harry Potter might be able to use their emotions to fuel their own power and greatness. But if you let those emotions consume you and drive your behavior towards an uncontrollable dark path, things will only end in tragedy. Even Count Dooku, as we mentioned in the last video, allowed the death of Qui-Gon Jinn and all the other needless deaths he saw when he was a Jedi drive him towards the dark side. The same thing would happen with Anakin, and the same thing will happen to Saw. True wisdom comes from disagreeing with what other people believe, but also respecting their beliefs. I mean, this is something I struggle with every day, especially in today's world where we're constantly being bombarded by terrible hot takes on social media. It's so easy to discount people for petty reasons and cut yourself off from them. But those individuals will eventually find themselves either living a sad and isolated life or a life surrounded with people who think exactly the same way as you do, leaving you unprepared for the moment when your collective views and blindness ends up hurting you. Too many people let their ideas and politics define their identity, when instead it should really be your identity that identifies your ideas and politics. And if you're wise, you won't be afraid of the fact that you change every day as you encounter new stimulus, new ideas, new people, and your ideas and politics will change along with you. Especially if you live in a democracy, it is your civic duty to be a part of all of this, to understand what's going on out there, lest we all fall into chaos and show the world that we're no longer deserving of this beautiful system we've created. It's only organizations that are extreme in their views, like the Sith and the Jedi, that impose restrictions on education, discovery, and debate of ideas. They tell their followers exactly how to think and what to think. Saw Gerrera is not a Jedi. He's also not a Sith, but he is an extremist. He's an anarchist. He has his childish view of the world that there are perfect organizations, that there's utopia. And so when he encounters any system and finds any flaws, he'll reject it. And part of the reason why he does this is because he lost so much when he lost Stila. In a way, he believes that if he compromises his beliefs, whatever they are, he'll be tarnishing her sacrifice. Like most extremists, Saw has become overwhelmed by his emotions, his hatred, his anger, his sorrow. He can't make objective or even rational decisions about things and make the right decisions to give himself the best outcomes. Saw Gerrera can't even see that someone like Luther Rael is here to help them. He's an ally.
If we don't put aside our petty differences.
Petty! I am the only one with clarity of purpose.
Saw Gerrera is one of the most pertinent messages that Star Wars can give us in this modern age. And the message is not to go in the comment section and be like, that sounds like Democrats, that sounds like Republicans, or he sounds like a left-winger or a right-winger. No, the idea is that most people in this world, most people are good. I want very similar things to you and I: prosperity, safety, maybe some individual freedom here and there. And it's our choice to embrace and look for commonalities with each other, or we can focus on the things that divide us. At the end of the day, you have a choice. You have a choice to stick your head above the bullshit and fight for a better future instead of fighting amongst each other for the most ridiculous things.